Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, the St. Louis Blues earned 5 out of a possible 6 points over the last week during their Western Canadian road trip against the Vancouver Canucks, Calgary Flames, and Edmonton Oilers. Could have earned all 6 as they had a huge comeback against the Edmonton Oilers that eventually fell short, losing in overtime. But lots of stuff to talk about. Jordan Binnington obviously got chased after giving up 4 goals in that Oilers game. Ville Husso continues to play strong. Fourth line, Nathan Walker, guys like that continue to play strong. And Jordan Kyrou returns to the lineup tonight against the Arizona Coyotes, a game that I'm briefly going to preview after talking about that Edmonton and Calgary game. Lots to cover on today's solo episode. Make sure you stay tuned.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, Josh Hyman, and today I'm taking you guys on a solo episode. We're going to be covering the last 2 games that the Blues played. They played a back-to-back on Friday and Saturday versus the Edmonton Oilers first and the Calgary Flames second. Lost to Edmonton in overtime and beat the Flames in regulation, scoring a ton of goals and giving up a ton of goals in each. So we'll be talking about both of those games, talking about Ville Husso, talking about Jordan Binnington, and more. Always love a good goalie controversy on the Locked On Blues podcast, naturally. And then after that, going to be closing out the episode, previewing tonight's game against the Arizona Coyotes. Now, you guys are going to be seeing this, listening to this pretty soon before puck drop. Chances are you're even listening to this or watching this after puck drop of that game. So as usual with these kind of game previews that happen right before the game, not going to go too in depth. Going to be more talking about what this game means as a whole. That way, even if they win or lose, my comments are still sort of relevant. You know, I'm not just making predictions that are immediately going to get overturned by the game that happens, right after this episode goes out. So anyways, before we get into any of that, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Bet Online because today's episode is brought to you by betonline.net, where the game starts. All right, first and foremost, the St. Louis Blues on Friday night, late night, took on the Edmonton Oilers in Edmonton, and things got off to a very, very, very rocky start as 13 minutes into the game, the Edmonton Oilers were up 4-1, and that was all she wrote for Jordan Binnington's start. Binnington did get the start in this game, gave up a first goal a minute and 50 seconds into Zach Hyman. Blues tied it up a few minutes later with Pavel Buchnevich, and then Zach Hyman put them up 30 seconds after that Buchnevich goal. Zach Hyman scored again to put the Oilers up 2-1. 5 minutes later, shorthanded goal from Evander Kane, and then 3 minutes after that, Connor McDavid, who else, puts the Edmonton Oilers up 4-1, and then Ville Husso hops over the boards, fist bumps Jordan Binnington, and that is it for Jordan Binnington's night. Now, the whole philosophy of does the team play better in front of Ville Husso kind of came to fruition in this game perfectly as the Blues mounted one of the strongest comebacks we've seen from them all season. Like I said before, and we all know if you watch the game, they didn't eventually get the win, but they did force this game to go to overtime and earned a point in a game where they very much didn't deserve to do so. Rest of that first period, they kind of held on. Not really, they didn't allow any other goals, which was great. Husso played pretty well. The team sort of seemed to get their head out of their rear end a little bit and play a little bit stronger to close out that first period. But still, it was looking like a lost cause after that first period. And then the second period begins, and Robert Thomas gets things started with a wrist shot goal 2 seconds into the 2 seconds, 2 minutes into the period. Braden Shen makes it 4-3. A little bit of time left. I thought, oh man, the Blues might actually pull this off. And then Darnell Nurse scores off of a backhander with a little less than 3 minutes to go in the second period. But the Blues come storming back in the third, scoring 2 goals within the first 10 minutes of the period. Buchnevich with his second of the night, his second of the night to make it 5-4. And then Barbashev with a tip to make it 5-5 to force overtime. The Blues were down 4-1 and 5-3 in this game. And eventually tied it up at 5 to force overtime. Now, I mean, that's a perfect testament for the way that the St. Louis Blues have played hockey this year. I mean, Jordan Binnington didn't get any help from his teammates, but also played pretty poorly. Anytime you give up 4 goals in the first period, some of the blame has to fall on you as a goaltender. And I think Binnington knows that. And I think you can't really argue that. There's no secret that Binnington played pretty poorly in that game. And then all of a sudden Husso comes in and the team kind of turns things around a little bit. Obviously, still a high scoring game on both ends of the ice. Edmonton's scoring 6 goals. No, even if you score 5, anytime you give up 6 goals, it's going to be concerning. And we saw that again. Pretty fortunate for the Blues to earn a point there. You could call it a pretty solid performance. And I choose to take the optimistic approach and say, you know what, even when they're way out of games like that, even when they get, blown out in the first period, and give up 5 goals through 2 periods, they can still come back and find themselves in that game. The Blues are terrible in 3-on-3 overtime, but come playoffs, it's 5-on-5 overtime. So the Blues have a really, really good ability of staying in games when they want to, and we saw that in the Edmonton game. And then we also saw that in the Calgary game, which I'm going to be getting into in the second segment of today's episode, because the St. Louis Blues got heavily outshot pretty early into that game, and really just got outplayed for a significant portion of it, but still came away with a 6-4 victory with a lot of goals occurring late in that game. So I'm going to be talking about all of that and more in the second segment of today's episode. But before I get into that second segment, where I'm going to be talking about that Calgary game, I want to tell you guys about our good friends over at Built Bar. Now, I got to tell you guys about something delicious, beautiful, amazing. They're called Built Puffs. If you haven't tried Built Puffs, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. That's right, protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar. They're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some incredible flavors, including yummy cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. So delicious, they're going to be your new favorite. And all Built Bars, including the Puffs and every other product they offer, are covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low calorie, high protein. You can replace your candy bars with these. They're better. A typical candy bar is anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. But if you're looking at your typical Built Bar, 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. At Built Bar, they're all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first, and then they figure out how to make it healthy. Don't know how, but they pull it off seemingly every single time. So go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. I'll be right back with the second segment. All right. So the day after the St. Louis Blues had that wild game against the Edmonton Oilers, which they lost in overtime, to have at that point they had 3 out of 4 possible points on their Western Canada road trip. Always an extremely difficult trip for any team in the NHL. Play in Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton. It's a long trip, late hours, tough games. It's tough for any team. So the fact that the Blues had 3 out of 4 points for the first 2 were great. Heading into second night of a back-to-back on this road trip against a team like the Calgary Flames, who are really, really hot, really, really good team. Definitely a big test for the Blues and Ville Husso. And they stood tall to the task. Robert Thomas got things started very early, scoring a goal less than a minute in, which gave me shades of the Blues during their cup run, which I don't know if you guys remember, but I don't have a statistic in front of me, but the Blues scored early into games so frequently. A minute in, 2 minutes in, 3 minutes in. They were on the board first and early so often in those games, and it gave them such an advantage because a lot of times, they would catch teams flat-footed, not prepared, especially like on the road. They would score an early goal and then get, outplayed for the next 10 minutes, as you do on the road in a playoff game. But fortunately, they had that 1-goal buffer, and that 1-goal buffer was everything for them in this game. I'm pretty sure that Robert Thomas' goal stood to be the only shot on goal for the first, 10 minutes or so of the game. Brett Ritchie tied things up a few minutes later, and then Johnny Gaudreau took the lead a few minutes after that. I'm pretty sure at that point, when it was 2-1, the Blues only had 2 shots on goal. I want to see the exact tweet. One of our followers on Twitter pointed out the exact number for for how many shots on goal the Blues had. Here we go. Shout out Pat Houlihan. Oh, this was actually in the second period. Oh, never mind. So we'll get into that. Um, but yeah, the Blues did a really poor job of hanging with the Flames, at least pressure-wise, early on in this game. Ryan O'Reilly tied things up late in the first off of a power play goal, and it was 2-2 for a majority of the game here. And there's a nice little screenshot that I'll hold up to the camera. Hopefully you guys can see. All right, whatever. It's not gonna focus. So I'll just read it out that way. Those guys who listen at home, anyways, you guys can follow along. So with 10 minutes and 33 seconds to go in the second period, the game fortunately was tied 2-2. Flames had 2 goals, Blues had 2 goals. But halfway through the game, the Calgary Flames had 25 shots on goal. How many of you guys think the Blues had? I'll give you guys a few seconds to think of your answer. The St. Louis Blues, halfway through the game, had 8 shots on goal, less than 1/3 of the total of their opponent, the Calgary Flames. Yet they remained tied in the game. Ville Husso stood on his head throughout the entirety of this game. And that sort of gets into something that I'm going to be talking about once I finish talking about this game. And that's the fact that with this year, the Blues identity, and the goaltenders struggling as much as they have, the St. Louis Blues, to win a lot of their games, they're going to need elite goaltending. Fortunately, Ville Husso has been an elite goaltender for a significant chunk of this season. He's really kept them in games. This Calgary Flames game being a perfect example. Like, yeah, he gave up 4 goals, but there was a point in time where the Blues were getting outshot 25-8, and the game was tied. Husso had 23 saves on 25 shots halfway through the game. That's like That's the workload of a light full game for a regular NHL goaltender, making 23 saves on 25 shots. So a lot of times the game will end that way if it's a defensive battle. So it's just a huge testament for the way that Husso has played, and also kind of a testament for what's kind of worn Binnington down. Binnington's been poor, sure, but like it's a tall task to play up to the standards of what it takes to win games as a goaltender for the Blues a lot of the time. The defense has been underwhelming. The defense hasn't helped the goalies out a lot, and the forwards, they just score goals, but defensively, the forwards aren't providing a ton of help either. There's a lot that falls on the shoulders of the goaltenders of the St. Louis Blues, and that's not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, it's a really rough Achilles heel to have, but we've seen times in the past, like look at Montreal last year. They made it to the Stanley Cup final on the shoulders of elite goaltending. So it really just comes down to something that we've been saying for weeks now on this podcast, and the Blues absolutely have a chance to make some noise in the playoffs if they get hot at the right time. The fact that the Edmonton game went the way that it did, and now the fact that this Calgary Flames game went the way that it did, shows that the Blues can be getting outplayed if they get decent enough goaltending and their offense shows up. They can stay in games. They have the offensive firepower to stay in games that they have no business being in, and at times they have the goaltending ability to stay in games that they have no business being in. And when those two synergize, like they did probably both nights. I mean, I don't know if you could say the goaltending was good in Edmonton, but the fact that they gave up 4 goals so early and then, proceeded to give up 1 goal in regulation the rest of the way shows that Ville Husso did a pretty good job once he was called upon. In terms of the rest of this game, the Blues definitely picked it up a little bit later. Justin Falk gave them the lead a little bit after that point that I was talking about. And then the third period is where things got pretty crazy. Noah Hannafin tied things up halfway through the period, and then Nathan Walker, the Aussie, absolute gem on the fourth line, gave the Blues a 4-3 lead off of another just right place, right time goal. Absolute definition of a grinder for the St. Louis Blues. 7th goal of the year for Walker, which is crazy because he hasn't played a whole lot of games. He's been spectacular during his most recent call up, and that goal is no different from the way that he's been playing. Obviously, didn't end up being the game winner, but ended up being huge for the Blues as Ivan Barbashev put in an empty netter to put the Blues up 5-3 before Dylan Dube, whatever, made things a little scary, making it 5-4 Flames. So unfortunately, Nathan Walker wasn't able to get the game winner there, but Brendan Saad put in another empty net goal to seal things for the St. Louis Blues. Overall, just really, really solid Western Canada road trip. Obviously, you can look at the nitty gritty and look at that Edmonton game and be really frustrated with the play of the Blues and Binnington. And you could very easily make the argument that the Blues probably should have come out of that road trip with 6 out of 6 points. And if they played even halfway decent in the first 10 minutes of that Edmonton game, they would have waltzed to a victory. But then the flip side is, well, maybe they wouldn't have scored as many goals if they weren't down 4-1. Whatever. I'm choosing to look at this as a positive. The Blues have been struggling. to get consistent play as of late. And even though they lost that Edmonton game, I would argue that the stretch of their last 4 games um, are some of the most consistent hockey they've played in a long time. They beat Vancouver 4-1, they beat them 4-3, they lost to Edmonton 6-5, and then they beat Calgary 6-4. That is a 4-game point streak. The last time the St. Louis Blues had a 4-game point streak was 2 weeks ago, but that came with 2 losses in the shootout and overtime. So last time have won 3 out of 4 games. You're looking even further back. I'm going to do this live. Was late February was the last time the Blues won 3 out of 4 games. So the fact that they did this again, it took them a month to get there. I'm optimistic. Now, the Blues are facing a familiar demon tonight in the Arizona Coyotes. Obviously, like I said, chances are a lot of you guys are seeing or hearing this episode after the game. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with the specifics of the matchup, but more so just talking about how the Blues can hopefully avoid, former demons, not only against teams like the Arizona Coyotes, but they also play the Seattle Kraken on Wednesday. So you got to avoid trap games this late in the season. The Blues fell into a huge trap last time they played the Coyotes and got embarrassed. And that was or not, was it the last time they played, they lost 3-2. Real disappointing there. So I'm going to be talking about that, what the Blues can do differently this time against both Arizona and Seattle to hopefully continue this good stretch of games and carry momentum into the playoffs. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But first, I want to tell you guys about betonline.net. Now, betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports development, including this week's Masters Champions odds, podcasts, and reviews for all the different leagues this season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online where the game starts, and I'll be right back to wrap up today's episode. All right, ladies and gentlemen, tonight the St. Louis Blues return home to St. Louis to take on the 22-42-5 Arizona Coyotes, the second worst team in the league, all before facing the third worst team in the league just 2 days after that. And one thing we know about our St. Louis Blues is they love to play down to their competition. So I am not expecting a walk in the park for either of these games. Last time the Blues met up against the Arizona Coyotes, they lost 3-2 in a very, very frustrating game. One that had Tommy and I in feeling some type of way. And then the last time the Blues played the Seattle Kraken, they did come away with a pretty strong 5-0 victory. So we kind of saw the tale of two teams. The last time the Blues played the Coyotes, they really played down to their competition and let the Coyotes outplay them, outwork them the entirety of the game. And then the last time they played the Kraken, they looked like they were playing a team that was in the bottom, 3 teams in the NHL. So it's just a matter of, I've said this a million times, and it sounds cliche and stupid, and I hate that I have to say it again, but just play Blues hockey. Sometimes playing Blues hockey means you win 6-4 against the Calgary Flames because the Calgary Flames have a really, really potent offense, but you can outscore them. You can't go into every game thinking you're going to just simply outscore the opponent and win. Like the Blues were talking about during their rough stretch. They were basically saying, a lot of guys on this team think that we can just go out and just score more goals than the opponent and not play defense and, not help out our goaltenders and we'll win. And that is not going to work. You need to play good fundamental hockey. You need to treat every single game like it's, game 7 of the Stanley Cup final. You can't go in arrogant and think just because a team is where they are in the standings that you're going to have an easy time beating them. And tonight's game against the Arizona Coyotes is a perfect example of that. The last time that we saw the Blues play a poor team was the time when we had those brutally awful comments after the game about the arrogance and stuff. I believe that was the 5-2 loss to the Philadelphia Flyers where the Blues just absolutely embarrassed themselves against a lower team in the league. And there was a lot of talk about arrogance and them just simply thinking, oh, this game will be a walk in the park. We don't really have to hustle as hard. We don't really have to work as hard. And that's a very dangerous mentality to have in a league like the NHL where there's so much parity that any team could win on any given night. You have to treat every game like you're playing the best team in the league. You have to prepare like it's the Colorado Avalanche every single night. And tonight and Wednesday are perfect examples of that. Tonight you're facing the second worst team in the league in the Arizona Coyotes at home. And then in 2 days, you're facing the third worst team in the league, the expansion team, the Seattle Kraken at home before going into a tough back-to-back against the Minnesota Wild and New York Islanders. So you need to approach these next two games just like you're going to approach the Minnesota Wild game on Friday if you're the St. Louis Blues. And I would hope that after the disaster that was that Philadelphia Flyers game, they know how to approach these games now because they played some pretty darn good teams after that. Every single game was a game where the Blues either had to play even with or play up to their competition. They haven't had a game since that Flyers game where they've had the opportunity to play down to their competition, which was, which is the Blues' biggest Achilles heel. One of the Blues' biggest Achilles heels in this regular season is when they're faced up against bad opponents, they should just, take out to the woodshed and beat handedly and play good fundamental hockey. They've been going out and treating it like an all-star game and getting beat in close games. And you can't do that tonight and Wednesday night if you're the St. Louis Blues. You got to do what works. You got to do what worked in the Calgary game, because if you do what worked in the Calgary game, you're not facing an offense as good as the Calgary Flames. So hopefully, you're winning 6-2, something like that. The Blues played solid defense. They got good goaltending, or solid defense for their standards, I should say. And the offense was great. The puck movement was great. Robert Thomas continues to be a dynamic offensive player for the St. Louis Blues. They played really, really strong offensive hockey as of late. And if they can use these next two games as a chance to sort of get the defensive kinks worked out, hopefully, things will go their way. I fully expect the Blues to win both tonight's game and Wednesday's game against the Coyotes and Kraken because they're at a point in the season where you should be winning those games easily, So, I don't know. My lockdown player of the game for tonight against the Arizona Coyotes is a guy that struggled pretty significantly since the All-Star break, but he is still, one of, if not the best player on the St. Louis Blues, a guy that is returning to the lineup tonight after missing the last 3 games due to an illness, missed the entire stretch where the Blues were playing good hockey, and that is Jordan Kyrou. Kyrou is a guy that has, lost his identity a little bit as of late. The points are still coming a little less frequently, but they're still there. But the play and the ice time is definitely lacking. And that is, due to some simple mistakes that Kyrou's been making. He's been making some turnovers. He's been making the wrong read. He's been making the wrong pass read. He's been shooting when he should pass. He's been passing when he should shoot. The old expression, gripping the stick a little too tightly. And he's an elite talent on this Blues team, an emerging superstar even on this Blues team. And he's going to go through slumps. Everyone goes through slumps, especially Jordan Kyrou. It's kind of similar to his trajectory last season where he sort of struggled in the second half of the season. It's not as drastic, but it's definitely apparent. And if there's a chance for him to sort of get back on track, it'll be against teams like the Arizona Coyotes and Seattle Kraken, teams with poor defense, not a lot of speed. A perfect opportunity for a guy like Jordan Kyrou to get his game back on track and, hopefully lead the Blues offense down what is going to be a very important stretch as they're gearing up for the playoffs. So that being said, I'm going to wrap this episode up quickly. So hopefully you guys get a chance to see it and listen to it before the Coyotes game. So I wanted to thank everyone out there so much for listening and making us your first listen, making us part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. Or if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button there. Hit that notification bell. Leave a comment. We try to interact with all your comments that you guys leave us. So definitely check us out there. Check us out on all of our socials, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Locked On Blues. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. You can follow Tommy on Twitter at TWatcher15. Follow us on Twitter, like I said, Locked On Blues. Thanks so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.